Chapter 13. The steward had left the room by the time they returned, leaving the butler to watch the errant footman. Justice was frustrated that he would not be able to discuss with him what they had learned from Fred, the footman, before he had left. "Mr. Patrick, have you seen my steward?" "He just left, my lord. He said he was going to catch a traitor." "I thought you had sent him, my lord." The butler was surprised by Justice's question. "In a manner of speaking, I did send him. I just wanted to have a few words with him before he left is all. Do not trouble yourself." Once more he clenched his jaw in frustration and stalked from the room. He found his wife pacing in the upper hallway. "Is aught amiss with you, my dear lady?" She stopped in her tracks, and he took her cold hands in his. "Nothing is amiss except for the obvious, my lord. I cannot abide this waiting. It was better when I was questioning the servants. It gave me something to do." Justice grew wary when she turned to him with a pleading gaze. "Couldn't we go into the village and start asking questions? Now that we know most of the facts, it shouldn't be that difficult to get the rest of the tale." "Absolutely not, my dear. I'm not letting you out of my sight or out of this house until we have your assailant captured." He almost chuckled as she threw him a disgruntled look. "Truly, my lord, what if this doesn't get straightened out today, or this week? Are we both going to be confined here, cowering in fear? That is not how I intend to live my life." She renewed her pacing, and Justice could not blame her for being frustrated and upset. He tried to distract her. "How is your arm feeling today, my dear? Would you feel up to having that billiards lesson you were hoping for?" It was impossible to contain his laughter as she looked at him with warring expressions of delight and disgust on her face. "You are just trying to turn me up sweet now, aren't you, my lord?" "Is it working?" "No, but I will take you up on your offer anyway." With that, they both laughed, even if hers sounded on the edge of hysteria. Justice was relieved to see her maintaining her sense of humor. The activity gave them something to do and helped pass the time while they waited to learn more. They had managed to become so engrossed in their game that they were surprised to be interrupted by the steward some time later. "My lord, my lady, I am sorry to disturb you, but I was sure you would want to hear from me at your earliest convenience." "Of course, David, please come in." The Earl gestured gracefully for the man to enter the room. "I must tell you, though, that I was disappointed that you had left before I could speak to you." David, the steward, bowed his head sheepishly. "I apologize, my lord. When you left to see the Countess, I was too anxious to get on with finding the cur who was conspiring against you. After what that numbskull Fred said, I was certain I knew just who to speak to. And I was right." "What did you find out?" Justice was surprised to hear his wife's voice, but then reprimanded himself for not expecting it. Has the chit not been investigating on her own? She was not the shrinking violet he expected such a young woman to be. Forcing his attention back to the matter at hand, and away from his beautiful wife, Justice focused on what his steward had to say. "I found the contact at the livery. Not the brightest chap in the world. It would seem he was just a go-between. He had no idea the messages weren't from you, my lord. He thought he was doing you a grand favour by passing your messages along. Right disappointed he was to find out otherwise. And when he finally realized that he had helped in injuring her ladyship, the bloke nearly wept." Justice was gratified to hear his wife's giggle. "I shouldn't find that funny, should I?" she asked rhetorically. "When this is sorted out, we ought to go and visit the poor man to set his mind at ease." "You are a marvel, my lady," was all he could reply in the presence of the steward, but it was with difficulty that he tore his gaze back to the other man. "What else was he able to tell you?" "He had been passing messages to two different people, interestingly enough. One was usually another go-between, but it would seem that on occasion Broderick himself came for the messages. Of course, he used an alias, but from the description I am certain it is him, my lord." As the steward was talking, the Earl's secretary arrived. It was obvious from his anxious expression that he had news to share. Justice could see that he was unsure if he should tell what he knew with Elizabeth in the room. Turning to meet his wife's gaze, Justice's heart felt like it skipped a beat when he realized that she was amused rather than offended. Michael, please, share whatever you have learned. Her ladyship is prepared to hear whatever you have to say, and she has every right to be here while we figure this out." The secretary fidgeted nervously in response to his employer's words, but he didn't hesitate much longer. "Turns out I wasn't much behind David with my questions, my lord. Seems your cousin, Hector, was using the same messengers to keep up to date on what was happening on your estate. He was in league with Sir Broderick, as you had suspected." Neither Elizabeth nor Justice was overly surprised by this news, but having it confirmed hurt more than he would have expected. He had never been close with his cousin, but he had always considered that, as family, there was a certain amount of loyalty owed to the relationship. He was startled to feel Elizabeth's hand sliding into his own. When he glanced down into her upturned face, all he could see was her warm sympathy towards him. His hand tightened around hers. I am no longer alone. That thought filled him with a sense of joy and contentment that he had never felt before. Clearing his throat, Justice returned his attention back to his secretary. "Was there anything else?" Michael shuffled his feet and flicked another uncomfortable glance toward the Countess. But after another moment of hesitation, he blurted out what else he had learned. "The other footman that had come with Lady Barbara didn't go back to her family as you had thought, my lord. He stayed in the village, found a job in the stables at the inn. I have good reason to believe it was he who shot at the Countess. He was seen speaking with your cousin on several occasions, so I believe they were in cahoots." The secretary wrung his hands as he continued. "I'm right sorry, my lord. It seems your cousin wanted your estate. Whether he would have killed you or just hoped to have you deported and taken over by order of the crown, I cannot say, but I am pretty sure it was the footman who pushed your first wife, my lord. Even though she had been cooperating with Hector and Broderick, it seems they were no longer happy with her." Hearing his wife's murmur of distress, Justice tightened his hold on her and nodded at the two men. "Thank you for your work. If you would meet me in my library in a couple minutes, I will be right with you." As soon as they had left the room, he pulled his wife into his arms. "Are you quite all right?" She gazed up at him as a tear trickled from the corner of her eye. She offered a low, watery chuckle. "It makes no sense to be distressed over it. I already was certain she had been killed. But to hear that it was by someone she no doubt trusted, it just makes me feel bad for her." She shook her head and sighed. "I know she was asking for trouble by being involved with Broderick, who was a very bad man. And from what I can tell, your cousin is just as bad, or even worse. I cannot even fathom what she was thinking. But no one deserves to be pushed to their death." They stood there quietly for a moment. Justice felt as though he could remain like that all day, with his wife's slight frame leaning against him. She glanced back up at him, and his stomach tightened. He wished he could do more than offer her comfort, but there were serious matters to be handled before he could truly demonstrate his feelings toward her. "Are you all right, my lord?" she inquired in a soft voice. "Why do you ask, my dear?" "You have just had it confirmed that your cousin has made attempts on the lives of both your wives, as well as possibly your own. And he was successful at least once. That cannot be comfortable knowledge." He had to smile over her understatement. "You are quite right, my dear. It is not comfortable. But I am relieved to know the truth. Now it just has to be handled in such a way that there is no longer a threat toward you, and all shall be well." "But what about your family?" He was gratified by her persistent concern. He rubbed her back slowly as she continued to lean against him. Justice wondered if she was even aware of it. Up until now she had shied away from much contact with him. Hoping to prolong the moment, he brought his attention back to answer her question. "You, my dear lady, are my family now. I never cared too much for Hector anyway. I am angered by his wickedness rather than truly saddened by his betrayal. As you say, it is too bad about Barbara. But it is behind us. We just need to ensure that justice is served on her behalf." "What do you intend to do?" He could hear the worry in her voice and tried to ease it. "There is nothing for you to worry about any longer. Now that we know what we are up against, we will be able to keep you safe." "That was not my foremost concern, my lord," she returned, her tone dry, much to his surprise. To his regret, she pulled out of his arms to be better able to fix him with her stare. "What is your concern?" He was puzzled. He was able to grab hold of one of her hands as she gestured to make her next point. "What are we going to do about Broderick and Hector, my lord?" Justice had to smile over her aggrieved expression. She spoke as though she were explaining it to a child. "I regret to inform you that you will have to remain here, cooped up in the house a while longer. The men and I will ride out and deal with Hector. From what Michael said, it would seem he is still in the vicinity." This statement made her pull her hand from his grasp and take a step away from him. Her attentive gaze verged closer to a glare. "You cannot be serious, my lord. Surely you cannot expect me to stay out of it while you go off on an adventure." Justice was incredulous. "This is not an adventure, my lady. These are very desperate men we are dealing with. I cannot have you anywhere near them. You shall remain here where I know you will be safe." "I'm safest with you, my lord," she answered stubbornly. Taking his wife's face between his hands, Justice held her gaze steadily. "I need to know you are safe, my dear. I cannot deal with this betrayal if I have the least fear that my cousin could harm you again. Please, Elizabeth, do me this favor. I swear to you I shall make it up to you for the rest of our lives, but you must promise me that you will stay here in the house, with the doors locked." He could feel her intelligent gaze searching his face. He had no idea what she saw there, but it must have been convincing, for she finally gave a small nod. She brought her hands up to cover his where they still cupped her face. "Very well, my lord. I will do as you ask. But you must swear to me that you will keep yourself safe. I have no interest in becoming a widow at this point of my life." His laugh was husky with relief and joy before he slowly lowered his head toward hers. He brushed her lips gently with his own. Justice could feel hers quiver at her sharp intake of breath. He was drawn to her warmth, and he wanted to linger and savor the experience. Their lips clung as he deepened the pressure. She was oh so sweet, and he wished to spend the rest of his life enjoying this moment. An eternity passed, although it was not many minutes. With a sigh of resignation, he reminded himself now was not the time to dally, no matter how he might wish it. He pulled back and searched her gaze, quite satisfied to see the haze of desire glazing her eyes. He lowered his head once more. The final kiss was fierce but swift, as he hoped to imprint his taste upon her lips, so he would not be far from her mind while he rode out on this necessary business. Pulling back, he remembered that he had not responded to her command. "Very well, my lady. I promise I will be back in one piece as quickly as possible." With one more quick kiss, he strode from the room without a backward glance.